Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos and welcome to my Spec Spotlight for the Fire Mage. This is the series where we talk about specs in Mythic Plus, talk about what their strengths are, their weaknesses are, and talk about what to expect from them when you're playing with one in your group, or what kinds of things that you're getting yourself into if you decide to roll up one of these to play for yourself. So let's start off by talking about the strengths and weaknesses of the Fire Mage. Fire Mage's biggest strength right now is just the huge burst damage that they can do. Inside their combustion, they are just unmatched damage, the massive single target damage, and it scales into AoE very nicely as well. So Fire Mage brings a unique ability to blow up a pack once every 2 minutes. Now, one downside that comes with Fire Mage is that they do need to be maximized around that 2-minute cooldown. If you are just pulling 3 enemies at a time, the entire dungeon, and you're just pulling okay, these 3 enemies, and then these 3 enemies, and then these 3 enemies, yeah, Fire Mage is going to be able to combust some of those pulls of 3 enemies, but they're not going to look good on the overall meters because their damage is going to be fairly anemic most of the time, and they're never going to really get a lot of targets or an important target to kill with their combustion. Another drawback is that they're kind of bad if stuff is dying too fast. When I made my tier list videos and I've talked about all the great things that Fire Mage does, I get these comments of, I played with Fire Mage and they do no overall damage. And I think this is a factor that you'll see if you're doing keys, around the 10 keystone level with people who are mythically geared. And then a Fire Mage just presses their combust and things are going to die long before they actually get full value from their combustion. Their ignite isn't going to tick for its full value. And so they're going to do lower overall damage by a lot in that context. So Fire Mage really starting to shine at the very high keystone levels. Where it starts to really matter that they can, blow up packs quickly, and where things will live long enough to take the full damage from the combustion. So let's talk about the Fire Mage kit. Combustion is, of course, the main thing that is a Fire Mage special in Mythic Plus. It's a 2-minute cooldown, it makes them crit all their stuff, and they'll just do massive, massive damage to whatever they're hitting, and they'll spread a bunch of that damage through the ignite mechanic to anything that walks near that target. Probably. There's a little bit of RNG as to whether or not the ignite spreads, but it usually will. So that does massive, massive damage in single target and AoE once every 2 minutes. Fire Mage also has Dragon's Breath. This is a frontal cone disorient that can actually be very useful. It's kind of like an AoE gouge. It can be used to stop a bunch of casts, and it's not on many it doesn't DR with stuns and stuff, so that can be a really useful way to stop mobs from, you have Shield Bearers channeling their stupid Bulwark of Juju, and you need to stop them from doing that. Dragon's Breath is a great button that Fire Mages can press. In that context, a big piece of utility that Fire Mage has that the other Mage specs don't. Fire Mages also have Ice Block, as do all Mage specs. So this is an immunity, and immunities are very valuable in higher Mythic Plus contexts. It can be useful when things start to go wrong, or it can just be useful when you're targeted by some damaging boss ability, Severing Axe in King's Rest, or Last Boss of Toldegor, you're getting hit by a second explosive burst within a couple seconds and you need to just Ice Block to live. Totally valid way to play, and a big difference between specs that have Ice Block or defensives of some kind, immunities of some kind, and specs that don't. Fire Mages, in addition to this immunity, have a Cauterize, and Cauterize here is like a cheat death. If they would die, instead their health goes to 35%, but they get a dot over the next 6 seconds that deals 28% of their health and damage. So eventually they will get very, very low off this. They'll need a lot of healing after they Cauterize, but they can Cauterize and then they can hit their Ice Block if they need to. So they can use both Ice Block and Cauterize at the same time to save themselves, and the Ice Block will remove the Cauterize dot, and that can be very useful. Or they can just use them at separate times and survive 2 abilities that would kill somebody else who's not playing a spec with as much defensive options as the Fire Mage. So immunity and a cheat death, this is rogue levels of survivability, and that is very, very strong. Fire Mages can also put up a shield around themselves as well with Blazing Barrier that shields for 20% of their health. That's worth noting as well, although I don't have a little slide thing for it here. Fire Mages do have Polymorph. This is a hard CC that does not stop the mob from getting in combat with you. It's not like Sapper and Prison that way, but it can be spam casted. So in a pinch, you can have the Fire Mage keep CCing something, even if it has a dot on it, right? Like you're fighting a mob, you're fighting like a Plague Doctor or whatever, Witch Doctor, on the last boss of Templars of Thrallus, and somebody accidentally hits it with a Sunfire, but you really can't handle it right now, you just need to keep it CC'd. Fire Mage can just keep throwing a Polymorph over onto it and stopping its cast, and then eventually when the dot falls off, the Polymorph will stick. That's pretty powerful. Many other specs that have a ranged hard CC like this have a cooldown on it. but Fire Mage does not. Fire Mages have Time Warp too, so this is an upgrade over the drums that you'd otherwise be using in your group, unless you had, something like a Shaman or whatever that had Bloodlust. So powerful group-wide Bloodlust cooldown here. Very nice to have access to, and nice to save money and not have to worry about who bought drums. Do try to remember, if you have a Fire Mage in your group, to not hit drums. It's very common, actually, for groups that aren't used to having a spec with a real Bloodlust in the group, to just hit their drums on based on habit and then lose out on some value. So be careful about that if you see a mage in your group. Mages have Frost Nova, which will break on damage, but it can be used to help a tank kite, or if the tank dies and the Fire Mage needs to be kiting for a little bit, very strong piece of utility there. And they can talent into Ring of Frost. They don't always do this, but when they do talent into Ring of Frost, they can use this to set up, big AoE. The most common place for this to get a lot of value is actually in Tol Dagor. You can use Ring of Frost to set up a bunch of mobs to get killed by a couple cannon shots all at once, get them all in the same spot with Ring of Frost. So a useful thing that mages can talent into. Mages have both Spell Steal and Decurse. Spell Steal is an offensive purge that is a little better than most offensive purges, because there are some abilities that are very beneficial to Spell Steal. So in Temple of Citralis, there's these enemies that these Nimbuses that put a damage amplifying magic effect on themselves, and Fire Mages can Spell Steal that, and then they have the damage amplifying effect. That sort of thing can be pretty useful in a lot of different spots. So one common strategy, for instance, before fighting the third boss in Temple, is for the Fire Mage to go and Spell Steal one of those enemies, and then invisibility afterwards and drop combat, and then they can go into Galv with a huge amount of extra damage. That can be a useful thing to have access to. But in general, just an offensive spammable purge. It's not infinitely spammable. It costs a lot of mana, but they can use this to remove multiple stacks of Soul Fetish and Waycrest mana. Very cool there. And they have a decurse. Not too many curses in BFA dungeons right now, although there are some coming with the Awakened Affix next patch. And there are a few throughout dungeons, so it is nice to have the decurse on a DPS spec. If you're playing with a mage from the group finder, they do not have their decurse bound, so do not expect that. Mages have Counterspell. This is their kick. It is on a long cooldown, 24 seconds, so longer than the melee have, but the same duration as the same cooldown that most range specs have on their kick. Fire Mage Kick is also notable in that it comes with a 6-second lockout for that school of magic, which actually mobs obey this generally. In most cases, this will then stop that mob from casting things in that school for 6 seconds. And in some boss fights or on some trash pulls, this can actually mean that even though their kick is on a long duration, it stops the mob from casting for long enough that actually cancels out effectively with the fact that it's on the longer duration or the longer cooldown than the melee kick. And the final piece of utility I'd like to point out is invisibility. Fire Mages can click this button, and then 3 seconds later they go invisible, so they can use this to help facilitate skips, or to just, drop threat, or if there's a wipe going on so that they can live it, it can be used like Vanish from a rogue. So a useful piece of utility to have access to for sure. Okay, let's talk about how to build a Fire Mage. Generally, the major essence you'll want to use is Memory of Lucid Dreams. This is so good for getting extra Fire Blast charges in your combustion, and has great synergy with the Azurite trait that they stack as a minor trait, just kind of always whenever it procs. So a very, very powerful essence for Fire Mage, and pretty uncontested in that major slot. In the minor slot, something like Conflict and Strife for raw stats, something like Blood of the Enemy for raw stats, or something like Purification Protocol for a damage proc that does nicely in Mythic Plus and AoE situations. Those are generally the essences you'll see in those minor slots. The most important trait for Fire Mage is Blaster Master. Getting 3 of these is usually the best way to go, and generally the other traits they'll get from there are kind of just whatever the other good traits are on the same Azurite as Blaster Master and Overwhelming Power. Blaster Master is a trait that gives them mastery whenever they hit their Fire Blast. Lucid Dreams is giving them more Fire Blasts, especially in their combustion, so they can just maintain a 3-stack of this thing very, very easily, and just have huge amounts of mastery in their combustion, and then just the rest of the time as well, a reasonably effective trait. Fire Mages really value on-use trinkets that can be used to empower their combustion. Ajara's Font of Power is a uniquely powerful trinket in this way, because Ajara's Font of Power gives you a 30-second buff, and it puts other trinkets on cooldown for 20 seconds. So if you use your Font of Power, and then 20 seconds later, you use another on-use trinket, like the PvP badge is the best one in this spot, then for 10 seconds, you'll have both the Ajara's Font of Power buff and the badge buff, and then you can combustion in that, and you can stack all of this effect together and multiply it all together and do huge, huge damage. So by far the most popular build for Fire Mage in high keys is this double on use setup with Ajar's Font of Power and the PvP badge. If you don't have a PvP badge, the Balefire branch is a good option from Mythic Plus as well, but the badge is a little better. If you want to learn a little bit more about this double on use strategy, I'd recommend checking out a video from Preheat from Complexity Limit that I'll be linking in the description of this video. Very good way of explaining how to use double on use and how to sim for it as well, because normally the APL does not sim double on use very well. So that is a very, very strong thing to use in Mythic Plus. If you don't want to use double on use, you should instead still use at least one on use trinket and just use it with your combustion every time. And then you could put something like Leviathan's Lure in as your other trinket to not be doing this double on use thing. The double on use is enabled by Ajar's Font of Power. One of your on use trinkets has to be Font of Power to be doing double on use, and then the other one is just something is any of the other on use trinkets. One final thing that massively increases Fire Mage damage is the Hyper Thread wrist wraps from Mechagon, which can be used during their combustion to give them extra fire blasts and is worth massive amounts of extra damage. These bracers are absolutely worth farming for Fire Mage and will be better at basically any item level than your, mythic socketed bracers ever. So don't wear any other bracers than the Hyper Thread wrist wraps from Mechagon. Okay, let's talk about the groups that Fire Mage will fit well into and the groups where they'll have a little bit more trouble. One of the most important things isn't really the group that you're playing with, but more the fact that they're able to do big pulls. This doesn't even need to be big amounts of targets, just important pulls where combustion is good. Although anytime you're using combustion, usually the Fire Mage is going to want you to pull more stuff in at that time. So using combustion to kill a Void Touched Emissary, for instance, in Season 3 is a good strategy. But every time the Fire Mage does that, they're also going to want you to pull all of the nearby packs onto that Void Touched Emissary as well, and just nuke it all down with their combustion. So a group, as long as the group can pull off big pulls and is okay doing that, the Fire Mage is going to be happy. One spec that they have specific synergy with is Havoc Demon Hunters. Havoc Demon Hunters provide a lot of mob control and the ability to stop casts and survive in big pulls. So pulling 20 mobs at once, maybe there will be a couple of important casts, and Havoc Demon Hunters can AoE stun, interrupt one thing from afar, Fell Eruption another thing. They can do a lot of things to keep that pack under control. Havoc Demon Hunters also have a big cooldown in Metamorphosis that can be lined up with Fire Mage's Combustion to facilitate killing a big pull quickly. And they bring Chaos Brand, which increases the Fire Mage's damage by 5%, and that is a lot of percent, so extra damage boost there. Good spec to have. I mean, obviously, Havoc Demon Hunter, right now in the state of the game, Havoc Demon Hunter and Outlaw Rogue are just the best two DPS specs to combine with any third DPS spec. But right now, Havoc Demon, or even without that specific game balance that we have right now, the kits of Fire Mage and Havoc Demon Hunter are really well matched up together, and I think will always be a good combination as long as that stays true. The biggest tension with Fire Mage is adding another range to the group. Depending on the dungeon, you can get away with this, but in some dungeons, you'll really start to run out of kicks as you turn another melee kick into a ranged kick in the group. So generally, mages will play with two other melee and will not play with another ranged. Although there are some dungeons, as I noted, like Temple of Sithralis is a dungeon where double range is actually a pretty popular and effective strategy. It's hard, though, to play a different comp in different dungeons. Usually you're just playing with the same people and doing whatever dungeons you have as a group, so setting that up is a little bit tricky. All right, thanks everybody for watching. Hope you enjoyed this little spotlight into the Fire Mage. Let me know what specs you'd like to see next. I'm planning to keep doing these videos, although I may take a little bit of a break as we approach the kind of patch season, because I don't think that this is the kind of content that works really well right around that churn of a new patch hitting. So maybe like a week before the patch until a couple of weeks after the patch, I'll kind of put this series on pause and then come back with 8.3 versions of this series so that I can have, the new raid trinkets or whatever and all the new effects included in those videos and not really be releasing them at a time when they'll be quickly made obsolete. So, but for now though, I've still got a couple of these spotlight videos ahead of me. Let me know what specs you'd like to see in those videos. I am reading all the comments. I know there's a lot of requests. There's 36 specs in the game and everybody wants me to do theirs. So I'm getting to them as fast as I can. And I will get to all of these specs by the end of the expansion, probably in the next couple months even. So if you liked the video, remember to like and subscribe. Check out the other videos in this series and the other videos on my channel and my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/Dratnos. Thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.